can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm back with yet another adult video game on this YouTube channel. And this time, I'm here to argue that this sex shit is something our society desperately needs. Now, am I doing this video just to provide a justification for playing a porn game? I'd like to joke and say yeah, that's totally what I'm doing, but I'm actually being completely serious. We need porn games. We need adult media. And I'm here to tell you why. Before I begin, quick shout out for my Patreon. If you'd like to continue seeing videos on demonetized subjects such as this one, please consider supporting me on there. Thank you. Almost a year ago, I took my first foray into the adult video game world by playing a sandbox adventure game called House Party. A game in which you attend a house party hosted by a college-aged girl named Madison. At this house party, you can do whatever it is you want. And when I say whatever, I do mean whatever. And that's not just a euphemism for sex. You can even shrink down the game grumps and send them to the VR world so they can make it on time for their live performance of their show. But obviously, the main appeal of House Party isn't necessarily its ridiculous over-the-top humor, but rather its mature themes and adult elements. And by this, I obviously mean having sex with fictional characters. People like sex. People like porn. It's no secret in our society. But it is these sexual elements that got the game removed and banned off of multiple social platforms and storefronts, most notably on Twitch and temporarily on Steam. In response to this censorship, DIK Games, the creators of House Party, stated that it's much more socially acceptable to engage in the fantasy of killing another person in every perversion imaginable than it is to fantasize about having sex with another person. As I said in my video about House Party, I'm inclined to agree with this statement, as it's also no secret that we're a lot more culturally accepting of seeing harsh depictions of violence in all forms of media than we are of seeing sex and nudity. I'm a product of society in many ways, just like you and everyone else in the fucking world. So, before I played House Party, I felt a lot of discomfort with the idea of booting the game up and playing what people would call a sex game or a porn game. I didn't want people to see me playing this shit. I didn't want someone to walk in on me smacking some virtual ass. Hell, I didn't want someone to catch even a glimpse of cleavage on my screen. But House Party was the first game that made me think. Why was I so uncomfortable with sexual media? Why did it make me feel so weird and wrong? How was it that I felt this uncomfortable when I was completely fine with playing violent video games and watching depraved films? Why was it more uncomfortable for me to have a naked woman on my screen than having a dead naked woman on my screen? It was this revelation that made me realize that in order to get rid of that discomfort, I needed to normalize and accept adult-oriented content as meaningful and valuable forms of art. And to do that, I needed to play more adult video games so I could figure out just how valuable they could actually be to society. This led me to another so-called porn game, a visual novel called Acting Lessons by Dr. Pinkcake. If you haven't seen my video on acting lessons, then the shortest way I can describe the game is that it's a visual novel that initially poses itself as a lighthearted comedic sex romp, which then evolves into a much darker, drama-filled narrative filled with absolutely insane twists. I cannot do the game any justice in such a short time period. But I will say that the most important thing to note about Acting Lessons is that it has one of the most powerful and well-written narratives in not just adult gaming, but of all games in general. Acting Lessons, beyond just its ample sex scenes, features elements of polyamory and sexual liberation, truly emphasizing what it means to have a more open-minded attitude towards sex and sexuality. The game pushed me to think more critically about the representation of non-traditional sexual lifestyles in the media we consume each day, and how we could do a much better job about not just advocating for these underrepresented ways of living, but also ensuring that we represent them as normal and okay to pursue. For example, showing that it's completely okay to have multiple sexual partners and to feel no shame for doing such a thing. And if you disagree with that sentiment, stick around for a bit, because I really hope I can change your mind. Because this video isn't about telling you to change your sexual lifestyle. Playing these adult games certainly didn't change my lifestyle, but what they did do for me is make me more cautious about the way I view other people's choices, and the ways I may have judged other people for not doing the things that I personally do. Acting Lessons was the game that truly opened my eyes to seeing adult video games as being capable of something more than just being another medium for pleasure. It made me realize that adult games were capable of being deep, insightful, and even reflective of our society in ways so many other games are not. They broach topics and themes that few, if any, AAA games dare to talk about. And that's why I'm looking at Being a Dick today, which is widely considered to be one of the best adult visual novels ever made, despite still being under development. Being a Dick, which was created by the same developer who made Acting Lessons, Dr. Pancake, greatly expands upon the themes present in Acting Lessons. In it, you play a young man from a low-income family who moves away from his widowed father and summer crush to attend his first year of college at Bergmeister and Royce. During your character's time in college, he gets roped into joining a new fraternity called Delta Iota Kappa, also known as DIK, and it is here where you get fully exposed to the complications and debauchery of college life. Like Acting Lessons, Being a Dick is a choice-driven visual novel where your choices do actually have permanent consequences on the story, such as being unable to pursue certain women or missing out on particular scenes. And also like Acting Lessons, Being a Dick calls attention to underrepresented sexual lifestyle choices. Though, I will make a note here that I'll expand upon later, but it's definitely a game geared toward heterosexual male fantasies, which I will also note that I have no problem with. It's just something you should be aware of before you get into it. Anyway, I've said a lot of words, but the one key feature that everybody cares about is whether or not it has sex scenes. And I'm here to say that it does. A fuck ton of it. Just like House Party and just like Acting Lessons. The most important thread of commonality between these three games and all adult video games, however, aren't the graphic sex scenes, nor is it the amazing storylines, nor is it even the laugh-out-loud humor. Rather, it's the harsh cultural aversion to playing these games, seeing these games, and even talking about these games. And that goes for all adult media. Whenever we talk about sex or pornography as a society, there's this persistent layer of discomfort associated with it, just like I mentioned earlier. And why do we feel this way? Why are we so afraid to talk about sex? Why are we so afraid of sex to the point that there are certain groups so quick to censoring proper sexual education in schools? We're afraid to see, talk, and consume content associated with sex, no matter how innocuous that content may be. I get prohibiting access to sexually explicit content for minors before they're ready to understand it, but I do not get our collective society treating sex as this extremely taboo, restricted, and morally dubious thing that should be shamed. Because what happens when we're afraid of things? We censor them, we sequester them, we try to pretend they don't exist. We call those things harmful. And why is this rhetoric so dangerous? To put it simply, when people become so afraid of concepts or characteristics unfamiliar to their own personal identity, they create a social cultural division called an other. I don't want to share an overly reductionist view of what the other is, but for the purposes of being brief, othering is a philosophical concept in which an individual or group views another individual or group as alien and separate from themselves. To break it down further, otherness is a condition in which a person or group is seen as lesser or excluded from the centers of society, just because they do not conform to the social norms of society. As an example, we've already seen things get historically banned just because certain subsets of the population are afraid of those things. Just because those people see those things as other. Just a few months ago in the US, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed what is colloquially known as the Don't Say Gay bill, which bans instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity between kindergarten and 3rd grade. Regardless of whether or not you agree with the bill, what's even more important about it that you need to consider is that it establishes the concept of otherness. It emphasizes that to be gay or anything but heterosexual is wrong, or something that we should be afraid of or not talk about. And the examples don't end there. Governments in the US have even gone as far as banning or censoring discussions of critical race theory in schools. Most people have no idea what that even is. But again, for the purposes of being brief for this video, I'm just going to be overly reductionist and say that it's a concept that posits that racism is embedded in our social institutions. It's no secret that these two bills are targeted at marginalized groups that many see as other. And it's also no secret that these two bills have created more social stigma towards those marginalized groups, even to the point of inciting more violence against those groups. Society has no qualms with banning and censoring things they're uncomfortable talking about. We've got entire countries afraid to see two same-sex characters share a half-second kiss, for fuck's sake. The crazy thing is, you don't even have to agree with homosexuality or queerness to know that these bannings are a problem. It's a major problem to take away rights from other people or call for violence against them just because you disagree with them. And I'm sure many people can agree with me on that. The reason why I mentioned all of this in a video about a porn game is because as a society, we're so close to falling down a slippery slope we can no longer climb back out of. There are growing limitations on sexual freedom, reproductive rights are being taken away from women, and if we aren't careful as a society, we'll only continue to cultivate more hatred and violence between people who disagree with each other. That's why I'm here to argue that the less afraid we are to talk about and view adult-oriented content, we as a society can hopefully see sex and sexuality in a more positive light. And we won't be in a position where we rob women of body autonomy and choice just because our society is afraid to educate each other about sex. Being a DIK, and other adult media like it, are crucial pieces of art that can make our culture more inclusive and a better place for everyone to live. Instead of sowing harsh divide between people, we can work to accept each other. Instead of dehumanizing other people who aren't like us, we can learn that being different doesn't mean being evil or wrong. We have to face our fears with what's uncomfortable to us. We have to educate and expose ourselves to what we're unfamiliar with. And speaking of education, I just learned today that 37 US states don't require sex education to be medically accurate. Do you know how dangerous that is? For such a critical and ingrained aspect of human nature, you would think that we would support a healthier, open view on sex and sexuality, but we don't. If we're somehow able to finally remove that taboo of shame, then maybe, just maybe, we won't have new countless generations of individuals subject to sex-related anxiety, trauma, and a crippling fear to be who they are. And we as a society have accomplished something like this before, and I know we can do it again. In order to really understand just how important being a dick and other sexual media is for our society, I must contextualize why I think that. I have to show you the sheer power that social acceptance through cultural normalization has over our society. So before I take a deeper look at being a dick, I'd like to first tell you a little bit about what is now known as the sexual revolution. From roughly the period of the 1960s to the 1970s and shortly thereafter, there came a cascade of societal and cultural shifts in attitude towards sex and sexuality in the developed world. Before I continue, I'm gonna preface this section by noting that this period of time was far more complex than I'm going to portray it as. So I highly encourage you to do your own research about counterculture and other related social movements. Anyway, the 1960s was a pivotal period in history for social activism. I shouldn't have to tell you what the civil rights movement was. And this wasn't the only movement going on at the time. People advocated for denuclearization, people opposed US involvement in the Vietnam War, people fought for indigenous rights, people fought for rights for all non-white people. People fought for so many things that still persist today. Of course, I want to clarify that I'm not saying that the fight is over for any of these social movements. Rather, I want to emphasize that this was a time when significant social progress was achieved. In the case of human sex and sexuality, second wave feminism played a major role in broadening equality for women in issues such as reproductive rights, domesticity, and sexuality by critiquing the male-dominated institutions and cultural practices of society. I don't want to boil second-wave feminism down to just issues of sexuality, so I do want to at least acknowledge that there was a lot accomplished by feminists in this time period. For instance, they drew major attention to issues of domestic violence. It might be a surprise, or it might not be a surprise, to hear that domestic violence was considered socially acceptable and legal as late as the year 1975, because women were and are seen to be possessions of their husbands. And it was through the work of activists that women gained some protections from abuse. But getting back to my point about sexuality, this was a time when women actively sought to redefine sexuality for women as not just a means to satisfy or serve men. This extended further to a social redefining of what sex meant to everyone. Keeping this in mind, a multitude of social and cultural developments concerning sex and sexuality followed this sentiment. In 1953, Hugh Hefner published the first issue of Playboy, which featured a nude centerfold of Marilyn Monroe, who is probably the most enduring sex symbol Hollywood has ever produced. As you can imagine, Playboy was an instant success. Each issue featured unclothed women in provocative poses, a memorable characteristic of the magazine that gave it the lasting impact it still has today. Then, in the 1960s, Playboy added a new section to the magazine called the Playboy Philosophy column, which featured topics such as LGBTQ rights, women's rights, and censorship. Hugh Hefner is a controversial figure who was arguably exploitative of the women whose bodies he commodified. But nevertheless, Playboy played a crucial role in the increased liberalism towards sex and sexuality in the Western world. Playboy's consistent, daring representation of sex and sexuality helped normalize the idea that it was okay to look at, think about, and discuss sex and sexuality. But Playboy was far from the only factor in normalizing sexual content in the Western world. From 1959 to 1966, an American attorney named Charles Rembar won 3 important separate appeals to unban 3 erotic novels. The most notable was his 1966 appeal against a restraining order for an erotic novel called Fanny Hill, which is widely known to be one of the most banned books in history. The case eventually made its way to the US Supreme Court, which historically ruled in Memoirs v. Massachusetts that sex was considered a great and mysterious force in human life, and that its expression in literature was protected by the First Amendment. The US Supreme Court most notably stated that obscenity could only be defined as being utterly without redeeming social importance, meaning that so long as a work had any redeeming social importance, then it could not be considered obscene. This leads us to 1969, the release of Andy Warhol's Blue Movie. Blue Movie is most notable for being the first adult erotic film depicting explicit sex to receive a wide theatrical release. Because of this film, pornography became publicly discussed by celebrities such as Johnny Carson and reviewed by serious film critics such as Roger Ebert. 3 years later in 1972, Deep Throat became the third pornographic film to have a wide theatrical release. And it was this film's success that truly launched porn to the forefront of American culture. Deep Throat was such a popular major box office success that it was even used as the pseudonym for the informant who leaked key details about US President Richard Nixon's involvement in the Watergate scandal. You can see the shift in culture here. Society was becoming increasingly permissive in terms of how they viewed and talked about sex and sexuality. And I have to stress the word sexuality here, not just sex. Key protests such as the Stonewall riots by the gay community helped normalize and destigmatize sexualities that were once seen as completely and utterly unacceptable. All of these cultural movements involving sex and sexuality, combined with the proliferation of adult-oriented media, culminated in an increased acceptance of sex outside of traditional, heterosexual, monogamous relationships. Sex and sexuality weren't just associated with marriage between heterosexual couples anymore. It was becoming normal to consume pornography, to have premarital sex, to experience self-pleasure, and to identify as a sexuality other than heterosexual. It was now okay to have choice, to choose your sexual partner, to choose sexual pleasure, to choose whether or not you had children. In 1965, US Supreme Court case Griswold v. Connecticut ruled that it was unconstitutional to prohibit the use of contraception, further normalizing the use of birth control and advocating for sexual freedom. In 1973, US Supreme Court case Roe v. Wade ruled for greater protections for a pregnant woman's right to having an abortion, which, at the time of making this video, just got overturned by the Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas is even explicitly calling out to overturn Griswold v. Connecticut too. Not just that, but 2003's landmark decision for Lawrence v. Texas, in which the Supreme Court ruled in favor to not interfere in private sexual decisions between consenting adults. In short, the allowance of same-sex sexual intercourse. And it doesn't end there. Clarence Thomas is even advocating to overturn 2015's landmark decision for Obergefell v. Hodges, which ruled that same-sex couples have the fundamental right to get married. God, I really gotta finish this fucking video. It's possible you don't agree that all of these things are for the benefit of humanity. It would be presumptuous of me to assume that everyone watching this video thinks that it's okay to be homosexual or queer, or that it's okay to have sex with someone who you aren't married to. And to that, I have to say that if you don't think it's a benefit to reduce restrictions on our personal freedoms, to let people live life the way they want to so long as they aren't hurting others, to let people be happy, to not incite violence between opposing groups, then I'm not sure what more I can say to convince you. Open-mindedness is the first step to living in harmony with one another. And again, I'm not saying that means you have to start having homosexual relations if you're straight, but rather, I'm telling you only to accept that other people are different than you, and you don't have to dehumanize and oppress them for their personal lifestyle choices. Because we as a society cannot and should not be treating other people as lesser. We must push for equity for all types of people from all walks of life. And the way we do this is by normalizing through our culture that it's okay to be different from the social norm. That it's okay to pursue a life you deserve without being persecuted for it. And to reiterate, this is why I'm talking about being a dick today. Because just like what adult media did for the sexual revolution back in the 60s and 70s, adult media today can perform the same exact cultural role to counteract fear and hatred of the underrepresented. So without further ado, let's take a look at this beautiful, raunchy, absolute masterpiece of a game. Let us take a deeper look at being a dick. When I first set out to make this video, I wanted to make it similar to my video on acting lessons, where I went episode by episode and broke down what happened in each one. Unfortunately, that's not going to be possible this time around for being a dick. Not just because it isn't finished, but because there's an overwhelming amount of things I want to talk about in this game. So I don't want to get lost in the small minutiae of plot details when my goal for this video is primarily to tell you about why this game is so important. But, obviously, for the purposes of context, I'll bring up relevant plot points as needed. And if you really want to know everything that happens in this game, I highly suggest you play it. No online playthrough or summary can do it justice. There are obviously spoilers in this video, but I'll still maintain that the game is amazing even after knowing what happens. Anyway, as a little refresher on what this game is about, Being a Dick follows a young man from a low-income household who, after finding out that his crush at his summer job is already in a relationship, heads out to his first year of college at Burgmeister and Royce, where he quickly becomes immersed in the chaotic mess of college life. There are 5 notable groups on campus that the story follows. First are the Hots, the only sorority at the school. Then, there are the Jocks, also known as the Alphas, a historic fraternity at the school known for recruiting some fairly toxic men. Next are the Betas, a co-ed group of nerds that primarily spends their time in the library. After them are the Preps, who are essentially all the rich, privileged students at the school. Lastly are the Dicks, a new fraternity focused on maintaining brotherhood and hosting crazy parties. The MC meets a whole host of interesting characters from all of these groups in his first few weeks of college, many of whom, if the conditions are right, the MC can fuck if he so chooses to. Of course, this is a heterosexual male-focused harem game, so the men you meet are not included in these sexcapades. I don't want to minimize any of these characters down to being just mere sex objects though, as every single important character is extremely well fleshed out and driven by emotions and motivations beyond just sex. Furthermore, the game doesn't jump around from one sex scene to the next in quick succession either. Being a DIK emphasizes everyday, normal interactions too. You do things like study for tests, play Dungeons and Dragons, gossip with friends, watch movies, go on dates, and so much more. Being a DIK really makes you build relationships with all of these characters, humanizing them and making them feel less like sex dolls and more like real people with their own lives and troubles, just like how all healthy human relationships should be. These characters and your relationships with them are the core reason for why this game is as good as it is. And the issues these characters go through often illuminate problematic aspects of our society. But out of all these characters and relationships, I'd like to first take a particular focus on the 5 main girls presented as the MC's primary potential endgame love interests. It is through them that reality is reflected the most, and it is through them where you'll hopefully become more open-minded about seeing non-traditional sexual lifestyles as okay. Not just that, but hopefully through consuming their stories, you'll help support making adult media less taboo. And again, as I said earlier, the more we normalize sex, the more open-minded and inclusive we can hopefully be as a society. Anyway, the first character I'd like to discuss is Jill, a rich, kind girl who is the only female member of the snobby preps. You first meet her when she comes to your aid during a hostile confrontation with the jocks during your first week of college. As a rich, privileged, sheltered girl, she's noticeably naive compared to the rest of the cast of characters. So much so to the point that she often doesn't realize that the leader of the preps is creeping on her. The guy even has a picture of her on a watermelon, and you can only imagine what he does with that thing. Jill is quite an interesting character because your relationship with her is the least characterized by sex. There's undoubtedly a lot of lust involved, but to put it lightly, she's very sexually inexperienced. And I think it's important to have a character like that. The MC is mindful not to pressure her into sexual situations, and Jill is a character that really emphasizes how important it is to not feel shame when talking about sex. The MC explicitly makes sure she doesn't feel ashamed about her sexual inexperience. It's a great example of what healthy communication can look like between sexual partners. Before Jill and the MC can have sex, it's important for Jill to feel comfortable with it first. And it's moments like that where I think responsible sexual media can serve as a potential learning tool for those inexperienced with sex. And for the sake of all the Jill stands out there, I would be remiss not to mention how pure Jill's heart and intentions are despite her troubled past. She's a compassionate, thoughtful character who's easy to love. And as you'll soon see with the other 4 characters, they're similar to Jill in the sense that they each explore their sexuality and determine what it means to them and how they want to wield it. It's an important theme that I want to reiterate. Being a DIK shows how crucial it is for people to have the freedom to explore their own sexuality without being shamed for it. Just like Jill's slow, gradual build-up to becoming more comfortable with the idea of having sexual relations. And that brings me to my next character, Bella. She's a professor and librarian at Bergmeister and Royce. But more notably, despite her age, she's Jill's overprotective best friend. Though it is still unclear at this point in the story how they met. Bella has a reputation of acting cold, cautious, and distrusting towards other people, especially when they try to get closer to Jill. Because of this, the nerds call her the Ice Queen, a fitting name for her rather blunt, hostile demeanor. I find it hard to talk about Bella because a relationship with her can be construed as exceptionally problematic because of the imbalanced power dynamics between her and the MC, considering that she's a librarian and professor at the school and the MC is a student. But, having said that, it is important to note that your relationship with her is grown as peers and friends as opposed to teacher and student. And it is the MC who pursues her rather than the other way around. It's a complicated situation to say the least. Full disclosure, as much as I don't want to shame relationship choices, it's still challenging for me to accept that an immature 18-year-old could ever have an appropriate relationship with someone much older than them. But in the pursuit of being open-minded, I do think it works in being a dick. I want to give Bella some credit for being fully aware of how problematic her age gap relationship could potentially be. And I'd also like to give credit to the MC for his emotional maturity. So instead of being overly critical, I'd like to redirect my focus to who Bella is as a person and why I think her story matters. For most of the game's story so far, you spend a lot of time trying to prove to Bella that you're a good person. Mostly because she wants you to be nowhere near Jill. She slowly warms up to you though, and as you coax her out of her hard shell, you learn more about who she is and why she acts the way she does. Since the story is still unfinished, I can only speculate about Bella's history based upon current evidence, clues, and facts. It's revealed fairly early on that she's married, but her husband is nowhere to be found. It's unclear if her relationship was at any point abusive or if it's just neglected. But one thing is for certain. Bella, at least in terms of her sexuality, appears to be metaphorically and literally trapped by her marriage to this man. Because of her marriage, she feels that it's unethical to fool around with the MC, despite her husband seemingly disrespecting their lifelong commitment and practically not being in her life anymore. Her marriage stifles her sexuality greatly. She feels beholden to her marriage rights even though she has every reason to leave and explore love and pleasure elsewhere. Her gradual realization that she no longer has to stay sexually committed to what is now effectively just a piece of paper and a chunk of metal on her finger is, at least for now, a wonderful look at what it's like for a person to regain their sexual autonomy. Bella's marriage doesn't define her sexuality anymore. It is her and her choices that define it. Not only that, but she embraces her age and doesn't let it define her sexuality either. She never feels like she's too old for sexual pleasure. Bella, just like Jill, takes ownership and control over her sexuality in a meaningful way. And this theme will continue on to the next character I'd like to discuss, Sage. Sage is a student in her senior year at Bergmeister and Royce, but she's more prominently known as the head of the Hot sorority. You first formally meet Sage at the school cafeteria during your initial tour on campus, where you witness her having an argument with her jock boyfriend Chad. Chad aggressively grabs her and you're given the choice whether or not to intervene. For the purposes of this video and continuing Sage's storyline, I'll just say that the MC does choose to intervene. And this is partly what gets him into major trouble with the alphas. Anyway, it's revealed that Sage is arguing with Chad because she's absolutely convinced that he's cheating on her, and she enlists your help to prove her hypothesis. You do end up getting evidence for her when you catch him talking dirty on the phone, and this causes her to later break up with him. Before I continue talking about Sage, it's actually really important for me to talk about Chad too. I'm going to try my best to condense his storyline, but it's tough to talk about something so complex in a respectfully short manner. But again, I'm still gonna try. When you first get to college, you get assigned to be dorm mates with an extremely hostile and rude asshole named Troy. Among many other terrible things, he repeatedly emphasizes that you're not allowed to be in the room except to sleep. That isn't to say he doesn't have any moments of softness though. The MC loves to play guitar, and at one point, Troy even compliments his playing if the MC decides to play it in the room. This is an important detail, as the guitar means a lot to the main character. Which is why when you come back to the dorm one evening and notice your guitar missing, of course you blame Troy in a fit of rage for what happened. It's revealed that Troy used to be a former alpha and was kicked out for mysterious reasons. And you conclude that the alphas came in, beat his ass, and took your guitar. The reason I mention all of this is to give you a better picture of who the alphas are and the kind of awful behavior they perpetuate on campus. They're stereotypical, aggressive meatheads and are often the poster boys for toxic masculinity. This is why it's a shock when you later find out that Chad, the leader of the alphas, is secretly dating Troy. His dirty phone call, it turns out, was with Troy instead of with a woman. And when you discover this, you get put into a really difficult and precarious position. Sage has already mostly moved on from Chad at this point in the story. But does she still deserve to know that Chad was potentially using her as a beard to mask his sexuality? It calls into question the nature of outing closeted individuals, and it becomes a moral dilemma on whether or not to trust Sage with this information, or later trust that Chad will tell her himself at some point. More importantly, this situation is such an exceptional example for why we need to better normalize sex and sexuality in our society. Chad and Troy feel so much shame about who they fundamentally are as people to the point that they hide their relationship. And it doesn't help that the toxic, homophobic culture of the alphas will only direct more shame at them. Like I mentioned earlier, one pervasive theme in being a dick is the necessity to give people the freedom to explore their own sexuality without being shamed for it. And the unfortunate situation that Chad and Troy are in is a reflection of our worst parts of society. Chad and Troy, despite the oppressive nature of social norms, certainly cannot be labeled as completely blameless for their actions, of course. To return back to Sage, her life is directly impacted in a negative way by Chad's choices. Because of her hurtful breakup, she often loses focus and gets angry at a moment's notice. As you get to know her better, you help her find healthier outlets to take her anger and frustration out on, like teaching her how to play the guitar or teaching her how to fight. But the most important thing you learn through your blossoming relationship with Sage is that she's more than just her relationship with Chad. She's more than just someone whose entire life and story revolves around a singular man and his actions. And it's crucial for people to see women as more than just what their identity is relative to a man. She's not just the angry ex-girlfriend of a toxic jock. She's an intelligent, thoughtful, caring, hardworking woman whose sexual activity and sexuality doesn't define her. I want to make this clear before I continue. This is exactly why we need to normalize sex and sexuality in our society, primarily so these aspects of people cannot be used against them in a way that oppresses or judges or minimizes them. That's why I find it especially powerful that for Sage, sex is not some super serious sacred act to her. It's just one aspect in her life. This is why she's so open to having casual sex and being the MC's fuck buddy if he so chooses that path. I'm not saying that everyone needs to treat sex as a casual act in their life. For Sage, she chooses for it to not have as much meaning to her. Just like how Jill chooses for sex to be a really meaningful act to her. And having that choice is important. And the thing that is most illuminating for Sage is that she challenges stereotypes. Despite being the head of a sorority and despite being open to casual sex, she isn't portrayed as some vapid bimbo that only exists to provide sex. She isn't portrayed as stupid or ditzy or incapable of making good decisions or as being in a perpetual state of horniness just because she enjoys casual sex. She's portrayed as human. And again, just like with all the other characters I've talked about, Sage's story shows us that we must better normalize sex and sexuality so we can look beyond those identifiers and see the actual person behind the veil. Which brings me to the next two characters I'd like to discuss, Maya and Josie. For these two girls, I have to speak about them in tandem for reasons I'll be clear in a moment. Being a DIK story begins with you working a summer job at your local grocery store, where you develop a long-term crush on your attractive coworker Josephine, or Josie for short. For most of the summer, you don't say much to Josie because you're far too intimidated to speak to her. As you try to build the courage to ask her out before summer ends, you end up growing closer to her due to your mutual hatred for your rude coworker Steve. You learn that Josie has also just graduated high school, and you're both awaiting your acceptance letters to Bergmeister and Royce. Josie, however, is stuck on the waiting list, and the only chance she has to get in is if enough people drop out or forego their acceptance to the school. Anyway, Josie tells you that her dad can't pick her up today because he has to work overtime, so she asks you for a ride home. You tell her you only have a bike, and she wrongfully assumes that you have a motorcycle. But she hitches a ride on your one-seater bicycle anyway, and it thus kickstarts your growing connection to one another. Once you get home, you find out that you finally got accepted to Bergmeister and Royce, which Josie congratulates you for at work the next day. She insists on having a celebration before you leave for college, and she plans a date between you two for the weekend. During this rather cute and fun date, you reveal to Josie that you've had a crush on her all summer, which leads to a short makeout session and a regretful admission from Josie that she's currently in a relationship. A complicated one, but a relationship nevertheless. Josie, because of her guilt about cheating, stops you and asks you to take her home, but she insists that she still wants to be a part of your life. You reluctantly agree and head off to college after the weekend is over. You arrive late on your first day of campus and miss the beginning of orientation, and as you rush around trying to find the campus tour, you slip and fall and are helped up by a fellow freshman named Maya. She offers to show you around instead, and during your personalized tour, Maya teaches you all about Greek life at Bergmeister and Royce. I mentioned this because Maya makes a note that the only reason she's thinking of pledging at the hot sorority is because there's a rumor that they pay for your tuition if you're accepted. This is really important to her, and is a plot point that comes up later. Maya becomes your first friend and supporter on campus, and you later learn that another character named Derek is her twin brother. Later in the game, you pledge to the DIK fraternity with him, but I'll talk more about him and the DIKs in a bit. For now, I want to emphasize the bond you build with Maya. Your relationship begins as a fairly platonic one, as she offhandedly mentions to you one day that she has a boyfriend. And this is a detail that becomes important later. Anyway, she convinces both you and Derek to sign up for Gender Studies 101 with her, which, again, is an aspect of the game that I'm going to cover in more detail later. A fair bit of the game's social commentary happens in that class. I mentioned earlier that you get into an incident with Troy that leads to the loss of your guitar, but what I didn't mention is what happens afterward. You storm out of your room and have nowhere else to go. But luckily, Derek convinces his sister to share her dorm with you for the meantime. You grow closer to Maya over the next couple of days, hanging out and watching movies with her and such. And she grows comfortable enough to tell you that she doesn't actually have a boyfriend. It's just something she tells people so they don't get attracted to her. Maya, aside from Derek, grows to become your best friend during these rather troubled times. You especially support each other through the rough and difficult hazing process of the HOTS and DIKs. Quinn, the vice president of the HOTS, however, manipulates Maya into doing some really terrible things by essentially promising her that her tuition would be paid if she makes it into the sorority. When you question Maya just why exactly this tuition scholarship is so important to her, she simply tells you that you wouldn't understand, and she lashes out at you by saying that everyone always judges her all the time. She goes off on a rant and says things she doesn't mean to say out loud, like how her father had once told her that she isn't the daughter he wanted and that he wished that she was normal. Maya doesn't elaborate on why her father would say such hurtful things to her, but you comfort her anyway, which leads to a passionate kiss between you two. A few days after this tender moment, however, you go back home and visit Josie, who's glad to finally see you after all this time. She makes you a nice dinner, but it soon turns into an emotional night when she reveals that she's overwhelmed with a lot of things and just wants to move away. She's been having anxiety attacks about potentially not getting into Burgmeister and Royce, and opens up about how for the longest time, she's been having a hard time with her relationship because she's unable to see her partner every week. She misses feeling loved, and you actually make her feel that way. You stay the night and finally have sex with her despite knowing that Josie is cheating on her partner. When you return to college, Maya welcomes you home and despite having feelings for you, supports your decision to date. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to condense the story down even further than I already am. Essentially, you continue to get closer to both Maya and Josie and all the other characters in the game over the next couple of weeks. To your surprise, Josie decides against moving away, as she tells you that she finally got into Burgmeister and Royce. She asks if she can stay with you when she comes to campus, but you let her know that you've been staying with someone already, so she tells you that it's okay and that she'll figure out other arrangements. She does reveal, however, that her partner goes to Burgmeister and Royce, and this worries you since you're afraid that you know her boyfriend. Josie shuts you down, though, and tells you that she wants to tell you everything in person when she arrives. Meanwhile, Maya's dad arrives on campus and it's revealed that he's planning on coming by every so often to check in on Maya at random intervals to make sure she isn't doing anything wrong. When he leaves this time around, someone else comes by Maya's dorm, but she doesn't seem happy to see who it is. She invites them in and she introduces you to them. She introduces you to her girlfriend Josie. And it's in this moment where everything finally clicks together. Josie never told you that she had a boyfriend. She only told you that she was in a relationship. And all of Maya's vague struggles start to make sense. It's revealed that back in high school, Maya began to have feelings for her best friend Josie, which made her feel a lot of shame and doubt on whether or not it was okay for her to have feelings for not just her best friend, but a girl. And liking girls has been a feeling she's been struggling with and hiding her whole life. Josie picks up on this during a camping trip, however, and coaxes Maya out of her comfort zone. The two start dating until it's revealed that Maya's father vastly disapproves of their relationship. This is why Maya had mentioned earlier that her father had once told her that he wishes that she was normal and that she isn't the daughter he wanted. He forces Maya and Josie to break up, and he prohibits Maya from ever seeing Josie again, which is what leads to Josie's dilemma. Obviously, Maya and Josie still love each other, but because of Maya's father, they simply just run into too many relationship issues. They aren't allowed to see each other, and it greatly affects the stability of their relationship. This is why both Maya and Josie cheat on each other with you. Because you came into their lives when they were both vulnerable and lonely. This creates a massive rift between you and the two girls. They already have an established relationship and it doesn't feel like there's space for you in it, even though they both have feelings for you. So you distance yourself away from them for a bit to clear your head. Again, I'm shortening the story by quite a lot here, but you do eventually forgive them for lying to you because you still care about them. And the three of you work on repairing your relationships with one another. As your relationship with Maya and Josie heals, Maya opens up to you that the reason why she needs scholarship assistance is because her father is basically the co-signer on her student loan, and that he can just take it away from her at any point. This is why getting the scholarship is so important to her, because if he catches her with Josie, then she's not going to be able to afford going to Bergmeister and Royce anymore. All because she's in a same-sex relationship. You, Josie, and Maya eventually talk about your feelings for one another, and the two of them come to an agreement that they want to try opening their relationship up to include you in it. They don't just love each other, they love you too, and they want to make that work. So, because you have feelings for the both of them too, you decide to try it out. And it is with these two characters that you get to experiment having a polyamorous relationship with. There's so much to unpack here. I first want to address the biggest issue, Maya's father. His hatred for her and Josie's sexuality is immensely oppressive, so much so to the point that he controls Maya's life. He gets to choose who she loves and whether she gets to go to school or not, just because she isn't straight. He makes her feel shame and fear and sadness about being who she is just because she likes women. It doesn't matter to him that she's a good daughter. It doesn't matter to him that she's a kind, gentle, and thoughtful soul. And it certainly doesn't matter to him that she's responsible, independent, and smart. All that matters to him is that she likes women, and that's enough to set him over the edge. It's such a scary and anger-inducing parallel to how the closed-minded individuals of our world treat those who don't conform to the heteronormative codes of society. They don't care if the Mayas and the Josies of the world are good people. They only care to control those who aren't like them. That's why your story with Maya and Josie is so touching. The three of you have found love and are trying to make it work by being open-minded to it. All that matters is that you love each other. Maya and Josie's storyline fully represents the struggle of what it's like to pursue non-conforming, non-traditional sexual lifestyles in our increasingly closed-off, discriminatory world. Maya and Josie's storyline shows us just how important it is to normalize sex and sexuality. Because if it's such a big deal to have sex, or to be gay, or to be bi, or to be queer, or to be anything but straight, then those identifiers can be used to oppress people. That's why it's also important that being a DIK shows us that it's essential to be allies to those facing oppression for their sexuality. When it gets revealed that Quinn lied to Maya about the tuition coverage for joining the HOTS, Sage notices that something is wrong with Maya and asks her if she needs help with anything. Maya reluctantly reveals to Sage that she and Josie are in a secret relationship, and Sage not only maintains their secret, but she also seeks to secure a scholarship from Maya so she no longer has to worry about her financial security. Derek is also Maya and Josie's biggest ally, defending them not just from his and Maya's father, but from you as well. Because even though he loves you, he doesn't want you to take advantage of them and hurt them. And you get to be Maya and Josie's biggest ally as well. Despite how tough their life has been, you can give them a chance to experience who they really are inside. You get to be their safe space. That's why one of the most powerful moments in the game is when you arrange a private, one-on-one date for Josie and Maya in your room. You give them all the freedom they need to love each other. An experience that should be a right and a privilege to everyone, not just straight people. Being a DIK is an incredible game. Comedy is at the forefront of its writing, but when it comes to serious moments like this, when it comes to issues of sex and sexuality, the game is genuine in all the right ways. Admittedly, being a DIK isn't a game that's keen on exploring every different sexuality. And that's okay, it doesn't have to. At the very least, it excels at presenting the few culturally non-traditional forms of sexual relationships it does highlight. But one contentious issue that might rub people the wrong way is the character Derek and the shenanigans he gets into. I've only said good things about him so far, so it might be odd for me to say that. But what I've left out of my discussions of Derek thus far is just how sexist he is. But before all you Derek lovers rush to the comments and get mad at me for saying that, I want you to know that he's hands down one of my favorite characters in this entire game. Not because of his sexism, but in spite of it. He's clearly someone with a kind heart who would do anything for the people he loves. And if I'm advocating for my open-mindedness to those who follow non-traditional sexual lifestyles, then I'm also extending my open-mindedness to sexist people like Derek. Because it's only through open-mindedness that people can come together and have discussions and learn. It's only through open-mindedness that we can hope for people to change. And that's exactly what the gender studies class in the game does. Derek often gets into arguments with the stereotypical feminist characters and has some terrible and misinformed opinions about women, which even goes as far as wearing offensive shirts targeted at demeaning women. And yet, despite this, with each episode it appears that he opens up a little bit more to seeing women in a fairer light. He even has sex with a feminist, which he hated throughout the entire story thus far. Albeit not in the perfect circumstances and not without regret. The reason I defend Derek is not because I agree with his opinions, but rather because I think he can change. And I think the story is leading us down the path where he'll be much more informed. And he can only be that way if we give him the chance to change, not if we write him off as a lost cause. There is a problem with Derek's character beyond his sexism though. It's the fact that some people who play this game somehow identify with him or agree with him, when his philosophy is meant to be laughed at, not with. Dr. Pinkcake himself has stated in a Q&A that Derek's opinions and arguments are ones that he purposely uses in real life to trigger funny and interesting discussions. He goes on to say, "I have a bad habit of taking the side of a controversial opinion to stimulate discussion, even if I disagree with what I'm saying. Coming up with asinine views on feminism and triggering my feminist wife with them is a guilty pleasure of mine." Derek is hilarious and is easily the funniest character in the whole game. But you can't take his word as gospel. That's just something you need to remember. Regardless of your actual beliefs, and regardless of Dr. Pinkcake's actual intent with Derek's character, the most important part about Derek is that he represents how important it is to have dialogues about the important issues he brings up, such as feminism and the potential exploitation of feminism. Remember, there's validity to discussion. That's how people learn. Dr. Pinkcake purposefully presents two extremes in the gender studies class: hyper-feminist characters and Derek's extreme sexism. And it isn't to show you that he endorses either side, but rather it's to show you why it's important to talk to people and learn from them. That's why characters often acknowledge how wrong Derek is. The MC even views Derek's ideologies as damage. It shows that Derek has much to learn, and it's only through education that he can get there. I wouldn't necessarily call the gender studies class in Being a Dick educational though. And it's like that on purpose. Aside from briefly exploring the difference between sex and gender, the class is mostly a long-running joke where you talk about completely off-topic things like some girl's social anxiety disorder. Maya even pokes fun at this at one point, where she asks you, "This is what you talk about in this class?" The real learning from this game doesn't come from characters lecturing at you. It comes from its critical portrayal of real, damaging social norms and behaviors. For instance, one of your frat brothers, Jamie, loves to garden. His father assumes that he's queer just because he loves gardening. And though this hurts Jamie, it's really powerful that he continues to garden despite the fact that he isn't following traditional gender roles. And many of your DIK brothers are the same as well. Some of them are open to talking about their feelings and emotions, and some of them are open to expressing themselves in different ways. Jacob is into art, Jamie is into journaling, John Boy is into cooking and being a nudist. It's just refreshing to see that they all aren't stereotypical frat brothers. And being a DIK's satirical nature makes it ripe for endless moments of social commentary. Like when several of the male characters show complete confusion and insensitivity towards what PCOS is. Or like when Tybalt, the rich, privileged leader of the preps and quite possibly the actual worst character in the game, makes terrible, misinformed conclusions like saying welfare gives people zero incentive to work. But again, the reason I'm making this video isn't to tell you every little reason why I think that being a DIK is brilliant. It's to show you the power of what adult media can do, and just why it's important to have it and normalize it in our society. Being a DIK is just one of many interactive video games that lets people explore sex and their sexuality in a safe way. For example, despite this being a harem game, you can actually be almost purely monogamous if you'd like to. You're not forced to go out of your comfort zone or preferences, which is what all people should experience when they're learning about what they prefer for sexual relationships. But while I find being a DIK to be an incredible, insightful, and powerful game that has a lot to say about the social injustices of our world, I have to be careful about applying my favorable opinion of this game to all adult media. It's dangerous for me to advocate for every piece of adult media, because not all adult media and not all aspects of them are necessarily good or healthy for our society. And this goes for all forms of media, honestly. If we aren't careful with what our adult media depicts, we can very well make things worse for people. That's why we need to talk about equity and responsibility. Before I begin this section, I'd like to emphasize that I'm not a perfect arbiter who can deem what is and isn't right to depict in adult media. But I am someone who advocates for gender and sexual equity. It is my belief that all genders and sexes and preferences should be treated fairly and equally by society, and that no group should have to suffer injustice, discrimination, and oppression for being who they are. With that being said, I have to be careful about who and what I'm including in my defense for the freedom of sexual preferences. It would be ignorant of me to think that there aren't any harmful views on sex, so I need to make my viewpoint clear. Vulnerable and at-risk groups such as women and minors are very prone to the dangers of sexual exploitation and violence. So I do not condone any morally reprehensible sexual beliefs that set out to harm or exploit these groups. I understand how hypocritical it is of me to make an entire video about being open-minded to all sexual preferences and beliefs, while at the same time telling you that I'm explicitly against certain sexual beliefs. But I have to assert just how dangerous it is for me to include harmful sexual belief systems in my argument, because these perspectives are inherently more damaging than helpful to the cause of gender and sexual equity. I thought about naming a bunch of different movements I vehemently disagree with, but I don't want to contribute to further social division. I don't want to be responsible for othering these groups, to the point that they get further pushed to the fringes of society and become even more extreme than they already are. So I'll just say that if a sexual belief system is predicated upon promoting harmful, hostile behaviors, such as misogyny, violence, sexual entitlement, sexism, hatred, and so much more, then I don't believe these belief systems are deserving of the same protections and freedoms I want for consenting adults who simply want to love each other. But I will reiterate, I don't condone violence against these groups. I'm just pointing out that their abusive, harmful beliefs clash with the mission of this video, advocating for gender and sexual equity. That's why I have to point out that not all adult media is perfect or positive in their depictions of sex and sexuality. It is crucial for adult media to be mindful and thoughtful about how they portray men, women, and all other genders and sexes in their content. Adult media, just like all other forms of media, has a distinct power to influence its consumers not just in a positive way, but in a negative way too. So if adult media creators aren't careful, they can very well promote the same harmful values I mentioned earlier. Again, I'm not a perfect judge of what should and shouldn't be depicted in adult media. It would be unfair of me to just start breaking down random kinks and talking about how they're anti-feminist or whatever. It's just that we cannot be supporting the proliferation of problematic, harmful content that has the potential to make its consumers more capable of being toxic or oppressive. For example, it's no secret that the adult media market is heavily skewed towards male-centric sexual fantasies. Even the lesbian content market is saturated with media aimed at straight men. I want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with male-centric fantasies, but what can be wrong with it is that a lot of content made for men can dangerously lead to people viewing women as mere objects of sexual gratification. It's a very complicated situation that I still have trouble wrapping my head around. Because while I do think that normalizing adult media leads to greater gender and sexual equity, I also recognize that the very same thing that I'd like to normalize has the potential to be harmful if we aren't careful. Perhaps, though, it's through the greater normalization of adult media that we can have more substantiated, educated discussions on this matter, and find solutions apart from censorship on how we can better enforce and support a higher standard for adult media. With all that being said, you should know that I'm a heterosexual, cis male, so my worldview and perspectives are effectively limited to just that area of expertise. Despite many hours of research, I am certain that I'm still blind and uneducated in various aspects of adult media. But if there's one thing I'm certain I'm not blind about, it's the belief that we should all advocate for the normalization of responsible adult media. Because it is through this normalization that we can better fight for gender and sexual equity. Let's close out this video with some final thoughts. I clearly love being a dick and think it's a wonderful piece of adult-oriented media that other sexually minded content should strive to be like. But I want to be clear that I am in no way suggesting that playing a porn game means that the world will be healed and fixed. That's obviously a ridiculous claim, and I of course was exaggerating at the beginning of this video. Adult media is just one aspect in the journey to further normalize sex and sexuality, and it is just one aspect in society's fight for greater sexual freedoms. My hope is that by accepting adult-oriented content like being a dick, you come out of this video more willing to participate in a culture that promotes gender and sexual equity. We must continue to advocate for sexual liberation. We must continue to advocate for reproductive rights. We must continue to advocate for people to be treated fairly. We are at a pivotal point in American culture where we must decide whether or not it's okay to oppress people based upon their sexual lifestyles. And if you have a heart, if you have even a shred of empathy, then you know that we cannot allow for this blatant dehumanization of other people. We cannot let this deprivation of rights happen any further. So let us educate ourselves each and every day and fight to make a better world. We have a lot of work to do. If you enjoyed this video essay, don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content similar to this. I make videos about all things writing related. I'd also like to thank my patron Edith Lopez Torres for helping make this video happen. If you'd like to support me further, please consider backing me on Patreon so I can continue making videos on demonetized subjects such as this one. I'll leave a link down in the description below. And if you've got some time, check out some of my other videos too. I really appreciate you watching this one. And to everyone who made it to the end here, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.